This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey, we've got a special show for you today. With two major releases in November, both on a tabletop and for the computer screen, the Dune Imperium game is bigger and more accessible than it's ever been. Today, we're thrilled to speak with two special guests from Direwolf Digital, the game's creators. This is Marcus, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm also here with Mark, who I'm sure has played every Dune game that ever existed.
Hi, good to be back. I'm not sure about played them, but I've certainly collected more than a few of the Direwolf games. They all can't fit on the screen. But yeah, card games, video games, board games, I've got the lot, I think.
Lots of fun. And now a big welcome to Scott Martins and Paul Dennen. Scott is Direwolf Digital's founder and president, and Paul is creative director and designer of Dune Imperium.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us. I'm Scott. I'm the president. What do I do? Uh, cause trouble. I do a lot of our biz dev, and obviously, we're a company of around 85 people with our feet in both digital and physical. So we have a lot of projects going on at any given time. So kind of work with our production team to keep everything rolling.
And I'm Paul Dennen. I basically am on the creative design side of things. I used to be a programmer. I used to program video games and then kind of transitioned to full-time design. I mean, Scott, you were the one who convinced me to stop programming. You're better at design. So I did. We transitioned from video games to tabletop, and we still do both actually now, but we added tabletop to our repertoire back in 2016
with the launch of Clank that went on to do very well for us.
So thanks for having us, by the way. Yeah. Appreciate
it. Thanks for coming on the show. And as we ask all of our first-time guests on Dune Talk, we want to hear from both of you. How did you first get into Dune?
You want to go first?
Sure. An older relative cousin gave me a set of books when I think I was in grammar school, 6th grade, something like that. It was The Hobbit, Stranger in a Strange Land, and Dune, all kind of in a package together. It was like the Inception, and so I very quickly became a Lord of the Rings just nut. I got very into Lord of the Rings, read it over and over. Read Dune soon thereafter and loved it. And got to Stranger in Strange Lands a little later when I was a little older and really appreciated that as well. So it was kind of a your influential works kind of thing for me.
For me, somewhat similar. I had an older brother, about 4 years older than me, who was a much more avid reader than I was. And he had a big bookcase filled with various classic sci-fi books from 50s, 60s, 70s. And but I think that I saw the movie first. I think when it came out, was it 1984? I went to see the movie and I was very confused by the movie back then, but also very intrigued. So I then went to read the books because my brother had already read the books and was telling me about all the differences and that I should read the book. So I did, and I really enjoyed them. I was, a teenager, maybe 14 or 15 when I first read Dune.
Right. And one thing that's fun about being near the community is we often hear from people who want to learn more or check out some of the new products. And we actually do regularly get questions from fans who are interested in trying out the games, but they're not sure, which one of these should I pick? Which one should I try first? So in terms of, if you had to do an elevator pitch to those people, how would you describe Dune Imperium and the type of game that it is?
Yeah, Dune Imperium is more of a modern style board game. It's kind of a hybrid game. It uses what some would call Euro mechanics, but also very thematic mechanics at the same time. And it tries to fuse those two together to create a somewhat immersive experience where you feel like you are a leader of a great house of the Landsraad in the universe of Dune. It's not trying to recreate the story in a kind of narrative fashion. It's not a role playing game, not even close to that. It's more of a pure strategy game.
Yeah, a blend of worker placement and deck building. I remember, I think when like the first prototype came together for this, I was like, oh, this is like, I don't know. There's something about the way the board was laid out. Like the first time I sat down to it, that felt very resonant to me, which was kind of an interesting thing to focus on. But in terms of like elevator pitch for people who might be looking to get into playing Dune Imperium in some fashion. If you're brand new to, I mean, well, we're going to probably get into discussing Uprising here, but if you're brand new to the line, Dune Imperium itself is a great place to start. And also, we just launched Dune Imperium Digital. It's got a really great tutorial in it. It's a really great way to learn the game, as we've found with others of our digital board game adaptations, especially games, well, for example, like Root, which are a little more complicated. These are a great kind of non-threatening way to sit down and learn how to play in a kind of safe environment.
Great. So let's go ahead and dive into the origins, game design, movie connections, and latest updates on Dune Imperium. So I'm actually really curious to hear how all of it began. Maybe this is a question for you, Scott. What led to Direwolf creating a Dune game, and how did you decide on the type of game that it would become?
Yeah, was it 2018? I think Gen Con 2018. A gentleman, a friend of ours, Joe LaFabi from Genuine Entertainment, had approached us. He was a fan of Clank and a fan of Paul's work and our stuff. Had approached us about maybe doing a kind of licensed tie-in with Clank, and we had, this was all kind of meeting for the first time in Gen Con. And then I think the same day, uh, he, along with Gale Force 9, announced a kind of a master tabletop license for Dune. Was that announcement made then?
Sounds
Yeah,
right, yeah, because their game, the first one came out in 2019,
yeah, yeah.
next year.
So we raced over and said, "Hey, we love Dune. How about that?" Yeah, Paul and I both being fans of it, and so those conversations kind of heated up pretty quickly, and we ended up kind of sending over a pitch, and getting. We did the deal. We somewhere along the way, kind of an initial pitch for a deck building type game, kind of, since they were fans of Clank. I think that was the expectation to start with. Um, and then along the way, it became something else, kind of almost entirely. But yeah, that first contact was from Joe reaching out to us.
Great. And as you've described, the Dune Imperium, it's part board game. The deck building element makes it unique every time, and you've woven in the lore of the Dune universe actually into the mechanics as well. So I'm just wondering, what were some of the other games and influences that inspired the mechanics of the game?
Um, a lot of times you'll pick like a light in the distance to guide you. In this case, we actually picked the classic Dune game, the Avalon Hill that became then Gale Force 9 remade it in 2019. We picked that as a light to specifically stay away from. We didn't we love that game. It's a great game. I have the old Avalon Hill version at home, and we're at the office now, so I can't show it off. But
I just bought one with the Steam cover on eBay.
oh, really? I didn't know there was a Steam cover version.
Woo!
So basically, we didn't want to get too close to that game. So and that game kind of chose some really fun things, such as each player gets to be one of the famous factions, like somebody will be the Fremen or will be the Bene Gesserit, etc. Um, so that kind of, knowing that we wanted to make something distinct yet resonant in Dune, I think one of my first choices was, well, those factions are going to be almost like NPC factions. Their players aren't going to be them. You as a player will instead be a house leader, and it's up to you to kind of manage the political status and manage your relationships with not only the other players in a fairly combative way, but with those factions in a more political way. As far as games that guided us on the more positive side, it would be games such as, the classic deck builders like Dominion. Although I think Dune Imperium kind of takes a pretty different spin, because most deck builders, you play out your whole hand and you just take your turn and here's what I've got and here's what I'm doing. And you just kind of like juggle, almost like a circus clown doing something fancy on your turn. But in Dune Imperium, it's much more incremental, and you play one card, pass to the next player. So I hadn't seen a game like that. I guess there's probably plenty of games that have tension, right? With like, what are other players going to do? Probably worker placement games
general,
are good guiding force for that side of the game.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the way that the game changes as the deck changes, and you've got to try and discard certain cards or build the deck. That's really an interesting and intriguing element. You talked about the Bene Gesserit and other characters and factions in the game, and you've drawn from both the novel and the look of the movie, and also some of the expanded universe from the other books. Were there any particular elements of the lore that you really wanted to get into the game, or you couldn't get working, or were really happy of how they turned out?
I think, let me just preface this by saying that one of the really cool things about this whole experience has been how Genuine and Gale Force 9 and Legendary in particular have kind of given us the freedom to use the visual style of Denis' movies and create, right? We've been able to create some characters and some costuming and things like that have kind of made their way to other Dune products in the kind of overall line and franchise. So that was really fun. I mean, and we, as you're asking, we got to sort of bring in stuff from the novels that weren't directly in the movies, but in the extended universe. I think the one that everybody tends to cite as the chair dog as being kind of a fun addition to the game. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, there was just so much material when we first came out with Dune Imperium that we actually probably knew at the time, hey, if this is successful enough to make expansions, Ix, Tleilax, they're going to have to be part of it. But there was just too much for them to be part of it right up front.
Right.
So up front, it was more about establishing, the most common, the most famous characters from the core story. And because I don't think Ix and Tleilax get much, play in the first book, right? They're kind of mentioned in the appendix. So it was about getting like a good suite of house leaders, and we had to stretch and bring in some leaders that a lot of Dune fans probably have never heard of because they're in some of the extended stuff. We even got to invent a character that we maybe want to talk about as a separate topic. But getting like Duncan, Thufir, Gurney, all those characters into the game was fun. And, it is a what if game, very much so. Being a deck builder, it's kind of hard to allocate out like you're going to have this and you're going to have this, because part of the fun with deck building is the player agency. You get to decide how to build your deck. And
also the variety and the replayability that brings.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we basically threw those characters, which tend to be Harkonnen and Atreides heavy, into the main deck, so that anybody can acquire them, as if like, what if Duncan had been found by House Torvald instead of Atreides?
That's actually an interesting point tying to my next question, because there's always that balance in the gameplay. At what point do you really try to remain really true to the lore, and at what points you just want to make sure that there's a good game? So in terms of the leader mechanics, and as you mentioned, like having those main characters in the deck where anybody can access them, how did you find that balance?
For me, it's about being evocative with Dune more so than strictly resonant with the narrative, I guess. You want any one individual piece to resonate with a player. When you look at a card, and you look at Duncan, you want him to have something to do with fighting, right? He better be good at fighting. And in Dune Imperium, you can kind of reveal cards and they add swords to your reveal turn, which helps you win combat. So Duncan clearly had to have like more than one sword on him. Arguably, you could say that I misstepped with Duncan and that I didn't tie him to the Fremen right away, because I wasn't quite sure whether to. Like I gave him like a water-based mechanic as a nod to the Fremen. I didn't want to overtly say he is a Fremen tagged card, but we kind of got there eventually by releasing a promo, one of our first promos, I think, where Fremen was not only now tagged with Fremen and could go visit the Fremen, which makes a lot of sense. That promo also resonated with his people who watch this know the story, right? with a major event that happens, where you can like trash the Duncan card itself to do a very powerful thing. So yeah, it's all about being singularly evocative. And for me, like a big thing about matching Dune was getting that feeling of tension, competition, nervousness, and the core mechanic. Even though it's not really like I can't point at the core mechanic as like this looks like Dune. It feels like Dune when you play it, and that was very important to me.
That's great. One of the there's many features of the game that caught the attention of the Dune community, and as it was released around the time of the pandemic, one of the nice features was the app, the companion app that you distributed that allowed for people to play one-player game or expanded two-player games. What challenges did you face while trying to create a game which probably wasn't designed to be played during a pandemic, but to allow that to be played in smaller and larger groups?
Yeah, I think it was a last minute call kind of at the end of the day where like we really have to have this given kind of where in the world we all were. We had done solo support before, I believe.
As app.
Yeah, as app driven stuff for Clank. So we had quite a bit of experience doing companion app support for the Clank line, and we obviously want to continue to grow that app and that part of the business. It's kind of a great way to add value and content for players of our games. But yeah, we were kind of getting down to the wire on shipping this to the factory, and we kind of made a call that we really needed to make sure that solo was included. And I personally played a lot, play tested a lot of
You
this.
were the primary playtester
Yeah,
of solo mode.
yeah. It was, and it just turned out great. I mean, it's come to be pretty well regarded as a solo game, which you wouldn't have necessarily expected up front.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have expected it. We had to make what we call the House Hagel deck, which plays as like a third party, house leader kind of when you are in a two-player game, even you use that deck, because the core mechanics of Dune Imperium very much are predicated around at least three groups fighting over these conflicts and deciding whether to push their troops in hard, to try to win the spoils of war. And with only two players, it fell too flat. So we needed to invent it for two-player. And then it was a pretty reasonable transition to solo when in fact it wasn't invented for solo play at all. I'm sure we tweaked it and then we came up with additional rules for solo play.
And did that experience help with doing the Dune Imperium digital one? Because the AI in that seems very smart. I think I need to launch a jihad against it, but it's kicking me quite a few times.
Yeah, it's interesting because AI is. I guess to first answer your question, I don't know that it was necessarily directly influential on the quality of the AI for the app. Uh, AI is tough in these games. I think design and I think maybe not everyone knows, but we've done a lot of digital board game adaptations to digital, and Dune Imperium is our first of our own games that we've adapted. And I think having the team and Justin in particular, who kind of worked so much on as a developer for Dune Imperium in the first place, also be kind of our AI expert helped a lot. We know this product like the back of our hand. We're also learning and getting better at AI in general. Um, but yeah, I don't know that Hegel and the quality of the app AI are kind of necessarily correlated.
So as we've alluded to, the movie Denis Villeneuve's latest movie is Dune Part One, and now in just a few months, Dune Part Two. They've definitely driven a huge Dune revival. It's been like decades where there were literally no Dune games being created, and now there's so many being released at one time. How has Dire Wolf experienced this like creating licensed products for such a huge sci-fi property? And what sort of collaboration and feedback mechanisms are involved in all of that?
Yeah, I mean, we like it was interesting. We've done as a team in our previous company, and Paul and I and Ryan and others have worked on IP games in the past. We did an EverQuest TCG, a Star Wars Galaxy TCG, like our digital TCGs. Which is kind of our roots. Many were collaborations with other big IP holders. One of the cool things was we were supposed to release right, kind of very near the release of the original movie, and it got delayed a year. And like it was awesome, legendary. Our understanding is that a lot of other licensees were not allowed to kind of release their products and had to wait, and we basically got a year as kind of the Dune product related to the movie, kind of on our own. So we had a couple of bites at the apple. So that was super cool of them, and a good opportunity for the game. Um, we've talked a little bit about the process stuff, just in terms of like them giving us the freedom to kind of invent and explore using the IP. So there wasn't, we got a lot of good feedback from the legendary team, and from Joe again, who's kind of helps manage that relationship along the way. But they kind of trusted us to do our thing. Obviously, you have to go out for actor approvals on likenesses and things like that. So that process, there was a little bit of back and forth, but everybody, in that process was awesome as well. And the Herbert estate, they some of the things that Paul and the team came up with kind of went to them for their blessing. So overall, I would just say that it was very supportive and kind of rare. I mean, you don't always get the opportunity to sort of create like that with an IP like this.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you mentioned, I remember we did get the first look at a couple of characters through the artwork. Of course, not exactly, but yeah, it gave a pretty good idea of how they were going to look like in the movie. So I know that a lot of people probably caught their attention that way. So looking at your recent releases, so Dune Imperium Uprising, and I see the box there behind Paul, that was released mid-November, and it basically works as both a standalone game and as well with the previous expansions. And we've actually heard, I'm not sure if that's the official stance, but heard it being called a 2.0 version that basically improves on various elements from the Dune Imperium game that was released in 2020. So how has feedback from that original game and its expansions influenced the design for Uprising?
I guess the first thing I'll say, and Paul's going to probably address most of this from the kind of learnings and such, is I don't know that we necessarily intended it as a improvement kind of thing. Starting it.
Yeah, we would not really condone the 2.0, would we?
Nah,
Like in a sense it is, but
yeah, it's hard. It's hard. So here's the thing. Like, I think one of the things that we've experienced that also has surprised us is that Dune Imperium has become a very like competitive lifestyle game for a lot of players, right? There are people on Tabletop Simulator, um, and kind of all over, who play this game a lot, hundreds of times, right? That was one of the fun things about. I don't know if you caught our kind of Mr. Beast tournament a few months ago, but we wanted to create something that allowed us as fans to get to play in the sandbox of the new movie. A And B, like, feed those fans of the game who wanted more and wanted something fresh, right? We still think, and I still think and say all the time that, as I said earlier, like Dune Imperium is a great starting point for new players to the line. Uprising is a little more complex, a little more cutthroat. So it for us, it kind of falls on that curve of kind of a new release for people who love the game and want more of it. in terms of like the mechanics and the design and kind of improvements and such. Like,
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. It really, we had already come out with 2 expansions before this. So when you had Dune Imperium and then you added Rise of Ix, and that came with like an overlay board, and then you add Immortality, which is about the Tleilaxu, and that adds another board. We had a decision to make. We could have approached this as like, this is another additional thing that you will stack on top of Dune Imperium and Rise of Ix and Immortality, or do some combination of them as you want. But because of the movie, I think it just felt like a good opportunity to change things up in a bigger way, like kind of almost like not quite a table flip, but like pulling the rug out from underneath like the competitive players and giving them a new rug that is very similar in many ways, but very different, and makes them kind of recalculate and approach how they evaluate the game and their moves and card plays very differently. Like the biggest example is just combat is much more important and given much more weight in the Uprising game. And to us, that was just natural, right? The second movie we expect to be much more of an action movie with big battles, right? So,
did you see the trailer today?
Yeah.
One other kind of just going back a few points in the middle of Paul's notes there was, one of the points that we got, or one of the points of feedback that we got after Immortality came out was like, hey, this is great, and this is all working together. Like, what is one step too far in terms of kind of having a bloated experience versus, kind of a fresh, tight experience with a new product, but that would still, you know, kind of work with the content that people had already kind of bought into. So
yeah. So, combat worms were the big thing, right? Like when I was first brainstorming Uprising mechanics, this guy sent me, I sent him an email about like how cool I thought spies were going to be. And he was like, "Where are the worms?" Some kind of quote from The Graduate or
yeah,
something came back to me.
got one word for you, kid: worms.
Right. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think Uprising is like a very refreshing way to play if you're a veteran of Dune Imperium, because you don't need to feel like your brain is being weighed down by like another system that sits on top of other systems. You can set those aside, play Uprising, have your brain kind of relearn the system, and then if you're the kind of player who likes to play dozens or even hundreds of times, you can now bring back Rise of Ix and bring back Immortality, and they're all kind of compatible. Even the base game cards are compatible with Uprising. It's not as easy to add the base game because you'll end up with a giant stack of cards, and
Sure.
that's always going to be an issue with like deck building games, right? You probably don't play with all of your toys at the same time.
Also in mid-November, we had Dune Imperium Digital, which launched on Steam. So that basically offers players an official way to play the original game on their screen, currently on PC, but I understand it's coming to tablets soon. So I know that you originally went with the approach of tabletop for Imperium. So what are now your greatest hopes with launching on digital platforms?
Yeah, I think for us it was, not, as I said earlier, like this is the first of Direwolf's board games that we've done digitally, and we're working on, uh, we have a fairly big team. We're working on digital board game adaptations for other awesome games with awesome partners. Um, I think for us, getting the Dune IP out there, getting this very well regarded game out there for potential broader reach, new players, uh, access to people who like strategy games but aren't necessarily able to play tabletop games or not necessarily focused on that space. For us, it was just a natural extension of the IP as a whole.
So, just looping back onto something you mentioned earlier, you talked about creating new characters for the game. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that goes with working with the Herbert estate and the approval process of introducing effectively a new character into the Dune canon.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we, Joe, who I mentioned, Joe LaFabi, is basically the producer that handles approvals and communication with the licensors on all of this stuff, and he has done this a long time. He's great at it. He kind of handled a lot of that for us and handled some of the back and forth on both ends, right? With me and with them. There wasn't a whole lot to it other than us coming up with a few ideas and submitting them. A couple didn't work. A couple needed to be tweaked. That sort of thing. So little bit of a black box from our perspective, but ultimately kind of a lot of support in terms of our being able to add stuff to the game that helped us make a better product.
Yeah, we didn't really do it like willy-nilly. Like we didn't do it a lot. We did it when it was absolutely critical to do, such as, hey, the first game we wanted to have 4 different great houses. We obviously had to pick the Atreides and the Harkonnen, and then after that, what did we do? The Richese, and we had kind of 2 famous characters from that house. But then the 4th house was kind of what do we do? And we picked the Torvalds, who were mentioned in, I want to say House Carino, but I'm not 100% sure they started in House Carino. But we basically wanted a second leader from House Torvald because we found an interesting character from that book, and we were able to. It was kind of fun being able to create a character that got added to the universe in a sense. She's actually a spice addict, and when you harvest spice, you actually get 1 less spice to draw a card, kind of representing the spice addict ability in that way. And then we did a similar thing. We added a leader in Rise of Ix for the Moritani house because there weren't really 2. I think the main leader there had a son who was ill. And we didn't want to use him, so we invented a princess, and we even put her in quotes as if she was maybe a smuggler who they kind of welcomed into the house in a way, like she earned her way in via fighting and smuggling. So I really enjoyed the process, and I was pleasantly surprised that it went smoothly. And you're right; those weren't necessarily the first asks. We tried a couple different things, but it was fun.
It's good to hear. So it's been around a month since the release of Dune Imperium Uprising and the digital game that's available now on Steam. So I'm just wondering, I'm sure you've had lots of feedback from the Dune community. So is there anything interesting that you've learned or any feedback that surprised you?
I think I feel like the momentum for Uprising in particular has gone from like people going, "What the hell is this thing?" to really appreciating it. I think as it gets into as it becomes less of a theory, like somebody reading something on a screen, and it gets into people's hands, I think they're really enjoying it. And as players, especially hardcore players, do, they're modding it and tweaking it and doing all the things that they do. But it's all been, very positive. I think we just hit extremely positive on Steam for Dune Imperium Digital, which is awesome for early access. We're about to, I don't think this has been announced yet, but we're about to start testing our event system here, hopefully this week or next week, with kind of a tournament infrastructure built into the game. Obviously, as part of early access, we're getting a lot of good UX feedback and working out kinks and bugs. But overall, I'd say it's just been like very pleasantly surprised with how positive it's all been.
Yeah, it's still early days in terms of when you release a tabletop game. Some people will buy it, not be able to play right away, right? It's not the same as buying a video game, and being able to play solo. I grind it all weekend. You have to generally find your friend group and play some games with them. And sometimes it will take weeks or months for that feedback loop to get back to us. But early signs have been positive. The hardcore players have probably played the most at this point and have had a lot of great things to say. And the thing that's made me the happiest is like hearing certain hardcore players say like, wow, I'm losing all the time in the new game, but I'm having fun learning how to play differently, because it means it was a successful rug pull, because it made them like have to reevaluate how to approach the game.
And does Direwolf interact with the community a lot? You've got your own Discord. How else do you interact with both the Dune community and the board game community as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, we do. It's relatively light, I guess I would say. Our Discord, we are in our Discord and we answer questions. I know Paul answers a lot of questions on Board Game Geek, and we both answer questions. So do I. We both answer questions on Discord. We kind of let the community do its own thing in large part, and kind of talk to one another and answer questions for one another when they can. And if clarifications are needed, we'll hop in. Obviously, there's some back and forth on the Steam forums with the, reacting to feedback and asking for clarification when people are having issues and all that sort of stuff. But I'd say, probably at this point, it's a fairly light touch. We recognize and appreciate the community. And it's extensive in some ways because we've got a lot of different types of products. Um,
Yeah, we have a Facebook group too,
yeah,
but a lot of times, by the time we see the question, multiple people have already answered correctly. So a
right.
lot of times I'll just click thumbs up on,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
like the good answer, and that's kind of an easy way to interact.
That's always a good sign, right? If the community is helping each other as well.
Right.
And it looks like, at least from looking, it looks like you've really built out a vibrant, organized play scene when it comes to your digital card game Eternal. I hear a lot about it, and I see a lot of activity going around there, especially very competitive. And I think, Scott, you were mentioning that earlier about how for Dune Imperium, like, surprisingly, that there are a lot of highly competitive players. Do you believe that Dune Imperium as itself is a game that can support like that level of competition, and or do you think its strengths are more on the social side?
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the things. The Mr. Beast tournament was a tournament, and it was like full of many very good players who had played many hours of Dune Imperium overall. Lucky Duck Games, our French partner, is running a whole uh, organized play kind of lead up to a world championship in 2024. I think that's just getting underway here in January. We've run North American championships for Dune Imperium the last couple of years at Gen Con.
Yeah.
We absolutely think that there's good support and a good product there for competitive scene. I think we're still kind of working on how to tie all of these things together. But for example, for the Mr. Beast tournament, we invited the last year's French champion, the last two Gen Con champions, and things like that. So we're trying to, even if it's not formal, kind of honor the successes of the people who've done well in competitive play so far.
And when it comes to the future of events, tournaments, now that you have both the tabletop experience and the digital experience, how do you see those coming together? What would be your ideal state for competitive play across those two?
I think digital potentially gives us the opportunity to allow more people to participate around the world in different levels of play. And so perhaps, there's some kind of qualifiers or such in digital that can then feed into a physical event or something like that. But we do see them as potentially working together. We're in the midst of kind of figuring out exactly what that looks like.
And we also had a very positive review about the game from our reviewer. It's up now on DUNETalk.com, and it was actually someone who's normally more into video games, not as much into board games, but they really enjoyed the experience of getting to learn the game digitally and play multiplayer. The main con, I guess, is that like there's not a parity currently between the digital and physical, so we have to wait until
Right.
the expansions come out. Like, how do you see that in terms of priorities? Is that something you're hoping to get out soon and eventually have that parity, or do you see that tabletop will always be, I guess, ahead in a way?
Ideally, we can catch up, but we'll see how it goes, right? Yeah, digital has gone pretty smoothly so far. I think we will prioritize adding Ix and Immortality over the next 6 to 9 months, but not sure exactly what that's going to end up looking like yet.
And then, as a last question, tying into Dune Imperium Digital or Uprising, I know that early access is supposedly not going to last too long. I think it was mentioned when it first launched it was going to be around 3 months. Is that still the plan? Is there anything else that players can expect in the next weeks, months?
Yeah, we have a pretty big patch coming out this week. Fingers crossed if it goes well. Otherwise, next week if we need a few more days. That'll add Chinese language support, and also this event system that we're talking about, as well as continuing to kind of iterate on bugs and UX issues. We are working on tablet support, so that should be coming relatively soon in the process. But other than that, I think it's sort of refining and kind of listening to player feedback and trying to make the experience as good as we can.
Scott and Paul, it's been a pleasure talking to the both of you today and hearing all these valuable insights about Dune Imperium. Before we go, any final thoughts for the player community or those thinking about checking the game out for the first time? Or if you want to, are there any other Direwolf projects that you're currently working on and would like to mention?
I mean, we've got a lot going on. We're shipping out board games for holidays from our warehouse. Obviously, you can visit direwolfdigital.com and kind of see what we're up to in terms of news and follow us on social channels. But no, I mean, I think the big thing is that we appreciate the support that Dune Imperium and our other products have gotten, and the strong communities that have kind of formed around them, and makes it all very gratifying for a team who's very passionate about making great experiences for people.
Yeah, I would love to talk about the things I'm working on, but I usually work on things that are like about a year off, and it's just way too early to.
There are some good ones. It's
excited.
Really exciting. Thanks again, both of you. And Mark, thanks for joining late in your evening. Where can people keep up to date with you?
Thanks for having me back on again. It's been great to talk to Direwolf Digital about their games, both physical and digital. Go buy it on Steam now. People can find me at Dune Info on all the socials. So I hope to see you there.
Thanks everybody for watching, listening. It's been a great time to hear about the game. Check it out if you haven't already, and look forward to a lot more news, reviews, and interviews in the upcoming weeks and months ahead. For now, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.